It began with a silence that swallowed a city. At 11:17 p.m., Dar es Salaam blinked out. Screens darkened, phones froze, Wi-Fi signals vanished, as if the coastal capital had simply stopped breathing. Officials called it a glitch. People called it a warning. By dawn, smoke rose from polling stations in Kimara and Kinondoni. The election, meant to restore trust instead, set the nation ablaze. Soldiers filled the avenues. Tear gas stung the air. 60 years of being East Africa's measured heart suddenly revealed itself as an open wound. Nearly 4,000 kilometers away in Ouagadougou, a former soldier turned president watched the images and heard the sounds. Ibrahim Traore had long said that dignity is Africa's truest wealth. Tonight, he watched dignity itself being tested. If power could turn off a city with a command, he thought, then a people could be awakened with a voice. Stay with this, because when Africa's young rise, the whole continent exhales. No one anticipated the first blackout, not the student. Finishing a midnight paper, not the taxi driver waiting for his last fare, not the reporter racing to file before curfew. One moment the city glowed with the notifications, the next it was dead silent. The outage lasted 7 minutes, brief enough for the authorities to deny, long enough for the country to remember. In those minutes, a nation learned how fragile its connections really were. The government blamed undersea cables, but independent traffic logs told a different story. Near total collapses across every major provider, a synchronized disappearance that looked engineered. When screens returned to life, they showed fire. Ballot boxes were overturned in the streets. Polling centers burned like braziers of rage. Clips spread of youth, hurling boxes into the road, shouting, "Uhuru kwa wote," freedom for all, until soldiers cleared the squares. The election that promised calm had become a funeral for trust. For decades, Tanzania had been the region's model of order. No coups, no civil war, a steady, patient stability. But stability can be a cage, and cages fracture when the people inside begin to insist on air. At the University of Dar es Salaam, 22-year-old Aisha waited outside the library when the rumor began, "The internet is gone." She checked her phone. Nothing. She tried again. Still nothing. Before the shutdown swallowed her signal, she posted one last image, a selfie beneath flickering campus lights. Captioned simply, "If they silence the net, we'll speak in the streets." Within hours, thousands answered. By dawn, Morogoro Road filled, taxi drivers honking in rhythm, vendors banging pots, students holding cardboard signs that read, "Truth cannot be unplugged." The police arrived in convoys. Tear gas turned the morning air white then gray. Someone managed a short live stream through a VPN. 20 seconds, the counter whispered, 1, 2, 3, and the feed died. Deletion in the digital age is a mirage. Once truth slips past a firewall, it multiplies. That 20-second clip raced across WhatsApp groups and satellite inboxes long after censors hit delete. Inside government buildings, the panic outpaced policy. Ministers issued boilerplate statements, maintain order, remain calm, disregard false reports. But calm had become another name for fear, and fear, when it thickens, organizes courage. Journalists built mirror sites. Students improvised offline mesh networks. Taxi drivers doubled as couriers, passing printed leaflets between checkpoints. In every blackout, there was invention. In every attempt to silence, a new channel to speak. By afternoon, the city split into two worlds, those with power and those with purpose. Armored trucks prowled one side of the boulevard. On the other, hands held phones like torches. The symbolism was sharp and immediate. The long advertised peace had cracked, revealing a generation no longer willing to live in quiet. Foreign correspondents found the capital hard to reach. Satellite phones jammed. Accreditation was suddenly under review. State television looped patriotic images. The president smiling with school children, the anthem swelling like a buffer against reality. It was illusion broadcast at high volume to a nation gasping for truth. The streets looked deceptively calm, but the calm was brittle. Behind shuttered windows, hidden screens still glowed. Whispered questions multiplied. If they can shut off the internet, what else can they cut? Far from the Indian Ocean, in Ouagadougou, another screen flickered. Ibrahim Traore, the Burkina leader who had risen on promises of dignity and sovereignty, watched images of smoke and crowds. The scene looked painfully familiar. For him, this was not merely a Tanzanian crisis. It was the same lesson. Told in a different tongue, control wears many uniform, military, digital, diplomatic, but it always speaks the same word, silence. As midnight edged on, new outages rolled through Arusha and Dodoma. State television blamed foreign cyber attacks. Social platforms, what little remained, replied with irony. The attack is domestic. Somewhere in the data noise, Aisha typed again. Through a flickering VPN. If they shut every window, we'll build a door. A friend screenshot it. By morning, that image had reached Ouagadougou with one blunt caption. The night the web went dark and the youth woke up. Power rarely panics under sunlight. It waits for darkness. In the capital, whose moral example the nation once cited, the presidential palace sat bathed in manufactured calm, curtains drawn, screens glowing, air conditioning humming. At 2 a.m, a convoy of black SUVs slipped through the southern gate. Inside sat security chiefs, cabinet ministers, and a political strategist clutching a top-secret situation assessment. Situation uncontrollable. President Samia Suluhu Hassan watched looped footage on the screen, smiling children and waving flags, a public broadcast that felt like denial. Once hailed as a reformer, she now found irony wrapping around her like a scarf. The defense minister warned, "Madam, the youth are organized. University networks, encrypted channels. If we lose the narrative, we lose control." The strategist proposed a brutal simplicity. Take the narrative offline. No one laughed. From intelligence came a single line that seemed to make the room colder. Shark UAZ trending across East Africa. Transparency as slogan. Honesty weaponized. Honesty does not win elections, someone murmured. For a moment the room was only the scratch of pens. Then a decision was signed. Maintain silence, whatever the cost. Outside, wind carried dust across Dodoma's dry plain. Tear gas still hung over the ocean breeze in Dar es Salaam. State media called the protests isolated vandalism. The police promised swift action. Telecom companies received quiet directives. To stabilize networks, a euphemism engineers understood as rollback and restriction. Aisha's viral post vanished within minutes, erased from the platform. But the screenshot had already traveled to a newsroom in Nairobi, to a diplomat's inbox in Brussels. Deletion had become propagation. Inside the palace, new calculations replaced old fears. Advisors fretted over capital flight, currency dips, tourist cancellations. But the president's line was chillingly simple. Markets return, voices do not. At noon she appeared composed, voice measured, declaring, "Our nation remains peaceful." Do not be misled by foreign misinformation. The live comments, however, filled with anger and the same refrain, "Uhuru kwa wote." The broadcast cut abruptly. Later that day, soldiers appeared outside newsrooms. Press cards were seized. A senior editor vanished on his journey home. His colleagues received one anonymous message: he is safe. Do not ask. A group of lawyers prepared a petition demanding an inquiry into the blackout. Before they could file it, the registrar's office announced maintenance. Law like the web had succumbed to the silence. Night returned heavy and windless. In the palace, Samia reread intelligence briefs whose paragraphs all ended the same way. Youth networks expanding. Her reflection in the glass looked older than the leader who once promised reconciliation. "They think freedom is chaos," she whispered. A memory answered from the past. A journalist she once silenced who had told her, "And control is not order." She pushed the thought aside. At exactly 11 p.m., another secure channel flashed. An unverified message from Ouagadougou. Samia opened it. On screen, in a short subtitled clip, Ibrahim Traore addressed the camera in Swahili and French. "Justice is not a Western word," his voice read across the feed. "It is an African one." For a full minute she watched, unmoving. Then she closed the laptop. In that instant, two Africans, through the thin pane of policy and power, looked at one another, one clinging to control, the other daring to breathe. Dawn brought tanks rolling silently into Dar es Salaam. The city's pulse slowed to the rhythm of boots on tarmac. State radio called the movement a precaution. Every listener understood the battle had shifted from streets to souls. Power had chosen silence. The question remained, what would the people choose next? Silence travels fast, so does courage. The morning after the armored vehicles, Tanzania awoke to its own heartbeat, low, uneven, alive. Streets once filled with slogans lay swept clean. Soldiers patrolled in pairs. The government called it restored calm, but under that veneer something was forming that could not be policed. At the university, leaflets appeared overnight, printed on smuggled paper, distributed in secret. The title read UAZ, an acronym in Swahili for transparency. Under it, one line, Kimya sio amani. Silence is not peace. This was no party, no formal movement. It was an idea that breathed. By noon, the phrase had spread across campus, turning from a whisper into a chant and then into a rhythm. Aisha returned to the courtyard where she had attempted to stream. Eyes still raw from gas, she climbed the steps and raised a small speaker. A quiet guitar riff poured out, a hum of a generator under the melody. The chorus was unmistakable. You can chain the body, but not the truth. You can break the pen, but not the voice. The song, Raresti, called Sauti ya Uhuru, the voice of freedom, spread faster than any sanctioned broadcast. USB sticks slipped past checkpoints in helmets and under jackets. Motorbike couriers carried copies hidden beneath fuel cans. Students in Arusha downloaded encrypted files. The government tried to trace the source and failed. The song was more than sound. It was proof the blackout had not worked. Factories resumed under watchful eyes, but quiet rebellions grew in workplaces. Teachers wore wristbands stamped UAZ. Taxi drivers tuned into pirate radio frequencies, broadcasting student testimonies. Market mothers pinned photos of missing sons to their stalls. To a visiting reporter, one woman answered simply, "Because remembering is the only way to stay human." And for the first time in years, the fear that had underpinned politics began to crack. The state replied with the only language it trusted, force. Dorm raids, confiscated laptops, interrogated student leaders. But for every arrest, 3 new accounts sprouted online, sharing screenshots, poems, fragments of the banned song. Truth had learned to travel underground. Exiled bloggers launched a site hosted abroad, a digital archive of testimonies and missing person lists, turning journalism into evidence. Outside observers shrugged and labeled it youth activism. They missed the point. UAs had outgrown protest. It had become a generation remembering how to breathe. Far beyond the Indian Ocean in Ouagadougou, screens glowed once more. Traore watched students chant in Dar es Salaam, heard the slogans echo the refrains his people had used back home: dignity, sovereignty, justice. He turned to his advisors and said plainly, "This is not chaos. This is Africa remembering itself." A 10-second clip leaked and began to trend. Judge Troy speaks for Africa. The connection was obvious. Burkina Faso's fight for dignity and Tanzania's struggle for truth were two faces of the same coin. Youth across the continent no longer saw patience as virtue. They saw it as surrender. By the end of the week, graffiti bloomed from Dodoma to Zanzibar. Water the seed, a line from one of Traore's speeches, turned into a coded greeting among students. A candlelit classroom of law students debated whether to file a constitutional challenge. One whispered, "If the law cannot hear us, we will speak until it does." Outside, thunder rolled, someone began to hum, and others joined. It was not yet a protest. It was a promise. That night, across encrypted chats, Aisha typed one line before going dark: "Freedom does not need permission." The message reached Ouagadougou within the hour. Traore retweeted it with one word: "Exactly." The official narrative began to fracture faster than it could be rebuilt. Attempts to erase Traore's name only amplified it. In countries far from the Indian Ocean, young Africans watched Tanzania and saw themselves. The question shifted. Not who will lead Africa, but who will listen to its young. Dar es Salaam's light still flickered. The silence was broken. The next voice to rise would not whisper, it would roar.